All right, guys. Hello and welcome back. So happy that you've joined us on this pre-recorded lecture. So guys, up till now, all right, we've been in period 4 now for 2 lessons. We talked about World War I and the causes of World War I. All right, the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, that spark to the 4 main ideas: militarism, alliances, imperialism, nationalism, right? Last class, we also talked about the conduct of the war. I told you all about total war. And I told you about the horrors that really are World War I. All right, trench warfare, barbed wire, machine guns. Now, guys, College Board is a big fan of historical thinking skills, something you guys know up till now. Okay, so now that we've talked about the causes of World War I, we need to talk about the effects of it. And in order to do that, we've got to end the war. Okay. I'm sure the soldiers of World War I would have preferred to have the conflict end as quickly as we've ended it. But unfortunately, the war went on for 4.5 years for them. But in 1919, the war is going to end. Okay. Well, more specifically, November 1918. The war will end on November 11th. Okay. So now we celebrate that in the United States as Veterans Day. It's Armistice Day when World War I ends. Okay. So guys, we're still in period 4. Heck, we just started period 4 and we are still talking about global conflicts. All right. Got a couple quick memes for you today, and then we will jump right on in to the aftermath of World War I. But I love this picture. I wanted you guys to see how exciting it is. World War I is over, okay? The so-called war to end all wars is done. And yet, in many ways, the war has really just started. The real true conflict has just started, okay? So a couple memes for you. I guess this one is not as much funny as it is painful. I don't know where somebody found a dab meme from World War I, but hey, whatever. All right, guys. So I don't know why that, okay. So on November 11th, 1918, Germany signs something called an armistice. Now, an armistice is not a surrender per se. An armistice is essentially just an agreement made by 2 sides of a conflict, essentially just to stop the gunfires. All right, it's really just a truce. So essentially, you can sign an armistice and then decide, heck with that, and then continue firing on each other. So when we celebrate November 11th, we celebrate Armistice Day. We celebrate kind of the stopping of the gunfire for a preordained amount of time until both sides can come to an agreement. Let me be clear, guys. Germany does not surrender, and that is a very critical component because once the 2 sides come together, the Central Powers and the Allies come together to work out a peace treaty. You know, if Germany's not happy with it, they could always just go back into the trenches and keep fighting. That obviously doesn't happen, but they're still not happy with the outcome of the Paris Peace Conference. So after the armistice, guys, both sides agreed to stop fighting. But the peace between the Allies and Germany is not necessarily an easy peasy conflict. Both sides have lost the war. Okay, even though Germany is sort of surrendering here, is at least agreeing to stop firing, they've certainly not lost the war. Okay, and France and Britain have certainly not won the war. The hundreds of millions of people that are dead certainly would not agree that France and Britain won the war. But in 1919, all the characters, all of Great Britain, France, Germany, Austria-Hungary, all right, Japan, Italy, the United States, all of the powers that fought in World War I come together in Paris. Okay, they come together for the Paris Peace Conference to dictate and determine exactly what the peace is going to look like. And of course, like all other really important treaties in World War I or in AP World History, it will be signed in the Great Hall of Versailles. All right, so the Paris Peace Conference creates the Treaty of Versailles, which ends the so-called war to end all wars. And I give you the quotation marks, guys, because we all know that this is not the war to end all wars. So tensions are going to exist after World War I. Now, I want you guys to take a look at this first bullet point. I gave you a list of the biggest losers of the war. You might notice that everyone is a loser. All right, Russia is a big loser of the war because, first of all, they don't even finish the war. They signed a separate peace treaty with Germany in 1917 and subsequently go through their own revolution. And at the end of World War I, Russia is now communist. Okay? Germany loses World War I. All right, when they have to sign the Treaty of Versailles and have to give up mass amounts of land. All right, they also have to pay something called reparations, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. All right, hundreds of millions of men dead in those trenches. Germany loses the war. The Ottoman Empire loses the war as well. Anybody ever wonder why there's not an Ottoman Empire today? Well, here's your answer. They lose World War I. Their empire is broken up. And the lands that made up the Ottoman Empire will be distributed evenly amongst the imperial powers. We'll talk about that in just a few minutes. The Austro-Hungarian Empire, also going to be broken up. And lots of its lands are now going to be made into new countries in Europe. You might be surprised, but the British and the French and the Americans also lost the war. At the end of the war, Britain gained nothing. They lost millions and millions of men, and they gained nothing to show for it. All right, the French, millions and millions of men dead in the mud, dead in those trenches, and they gain almost nothing to show for it. All right, they get back some of their land that the Germans took from them in 1871, but they really don't get anything else. The United States, okay? The United States, probably should be a big winner here. They only fought, I think, 18 months of the war. Their banks made a ton of money on the conflict. Their weapons, munitions factories made tons of money on it. But at the end of the war, they gained nothing, okay? And at the end of the war, the United States will go into isolation, which will be a major problem, which we will talk about in a few minutes. So guys, in 1919, the global leaders are going to come together in Paris. All right, they are going to come together at the Paris Peace Conference to negotiate what the world needs to look like now that World War I is over. Okay? Remember, Germany signed an armistice. They did not sign a surrender in November of 1918. So the following year, when they all come together, they've got to figure out what this sort of end of conflict is going to look like. Okay? Now, the Paris Peace Conference and the subsequent treaty that comes out of this, the Treaty of Versailles, is probably one of the most underrated occurrences in AP World History. The things that are decided at this conference, the things that go into this peace treaty, set the stage not only for World War II or the Cold War, but for today in 2021. When you go home and you turn on Fox News or CNN or MSNBC and you listen to conflicts occurring in Africa, conflicts occurring in the Middle East, okay, these things happen because of what is decided at the Paris Peace Conference. Okay, and now we've got to figure out exactly what those things are and what they eventually lead to. So yes, what we talk about in this class today is absolutely critical. And I know I said that a lot in this class, but this is important stuff. You need to know exactly what the Treaty of Versailles does for the remainder of AP World History. Okay, so the leaders of the most powerful, victorious powers, the United States, Britain, and France, are going to decide what the treaty will look like. Okay, when you win the war, you generally can decide what happens. Okay, remember, history is written by the victors. And as I said, guys, this is going to ultimately result in the Treaty of Versailles, and the treaty will be signed in the Hall of Mirrors. So we've talked about Versailles quite a bit in this class. Monumental architecture in France. Okay. Now, one of the things that is decided for the Treaty of Versailles is the creation of something called the League of Nations. Now, I just want you to write this down because this will be important in a few minutes. So the Treaty of Versailles will create the League of Nations. What the heck is the League of Nations? I've never heard of it. And that's because it doesn't exist today. What does exist today that is very similar to the League of Nations is the United Nations. So essentially, American President Woodrow Wilson in the aftermath of World War I, wanted to create an international body in which all the world countries could come together and sit at the same table and discuss their issues. He basically wanted a room where people could just talk out their problems instead of going to the battlefields and murdering each other. So he wanted something where everyone was a part of it. All right, Germany, France, Britain, United States, Japan, Australia, all of them to get together and just talk out problems. And at the end of World War I, pretty much all of the characters of the conflict will join this League of Nations. Okay, now you might ask, what did the League of Nations do since World War II happened? Obviously, it wasn't very effective. And we're going to talk about why in just a few minutes, but please make sure you understand that there are early examples of these nations trying to get together, trying to come together and to dictate and determine how to get over problems with each other. Okay. So I wanted you guys to see a picture of the leaders that dictate this treaty. All right. You had Woodrow Wilson right here, American. All right. He's from Virginia, sort of New Jersey. All right, American president. All right, then you have the French prime minister right here, Clemenceau, okay, Georges Clemenceau. And a British man right here, David Lloyd George. All right, so 3 white dudes that decide the fate of the world. And yes, that is how powerful the Treaty of Versailles will become, guys. So, as I have said to you, the Treaty of Versailles, when it is signed, it is going to create the foundation for significant problems. Now, it's wonderful that World War I is now over. It is wonderful that no more men are dying on the, on the borders anymore, fighting in the trenches. However, there are significant problems with the treaties. Pretty much no nation is really that happy. Okay, give me 1 second, guys. Sorry about that, guys. I just had to answer a text message. So let's talk about problems with the treaty. Now, guys, as I said, Germany signs an armistice, so they don't actually surrender in World War I, okay? Now, Germany assumed that because they didn't actually surrender, the things that come out of this treaty will be relatively gentle. And that is just not what happens at all. Okay, because France, Great Britain, and the United States are the ones that ultimately determine what the treaty looks like, France is very, very, they really want to punish Germany. Okay, they really want to force punitive actions of punishment against the German Empire. All right, they want Germany to accept full blame for the war. Okay, now we all know that it wasn't just Germany. All of these imperialist empires had their part in the proliferation of this war, but the Treaty of Versailles basically requires the German Empire to sign it and say, we accept full responsibility for World War I, okay? You can imagine the German people are not happy about that. The German people are also not happy about something called reparations. Now, again, France has just buried millions of their young men, all right? And they are upset and they are angry at the German Empire for this war. And they want Germany to pay reparations. They want Germany to pay France everything that France lost, okay? All the money that France had to spend for this war, had to spend to, send to these families of boys that were killed. Germany has to pay it. Okay, so Germany is forced to pay extremely harsh reparations. So over 55 billion, I think it's 55 billion. I'm not sure what it is adjusted for inflation, but Germany not only has to accept full blame for the war, but they also now have to find a way to pay this exorbitant, unthinkable sum of money to France, Britain, and the United States. Okay, so what is Germany going to do? Because they don't have this money. They too just came out of a really deadly conflict. So Germany's going to have to start borrowing this money from other places. And it's going to be really bad for the German economy. All right. Things are going to be very expensive in Germany while Germany continues to borrow money from places like the United States. In addition, the Treaty of Versailles requires Germany to surrender a third of its territory. Okay, we'll look at a map in just a few minutes, and you'll see that that giant German empire in Europe is forced to basically come down to this tiny little area. Furthermore, Germany will be forced to give up its colonies. Now, you know these imperial empires don't like giving up their colonies, but the US doesn't, or the France, Britain, and the US don't care. Germany must give up its colonies. All of this is going to pave the way for this bitterness in Germany. All right, the German people will be devastated. They have to accept full blame. They have to pay these reparations that they just can't afford. And on top of that, they've lost their colonies. And on top of that, they just basically lost World War I. Lots of their German boys are in the ground dead because of this war. And this bitterness is going to create this sort of atmosphere where people just don't really care anymore. They don't care about Germany. There's eventually it's going to cause this new rise of nationalism, which is going to be led by a man named Adolf Hitler. Now, he's right here. Adolf Hitler was a soldier in World War I. Okay, he joined early on in the war and managed to survive the entire conflict. He is going to start writing books. All right, Mein Kampf. He's going to start writing books about how this stupid Treaty of Versailles has destroyed Germany. And he's going to start blaming other people, specifically the Jewish people, for Germany's loss in World War I. But the Treaty of Versailles wasn't just unfair to the Germans. It was also extremely unfair to Russia. Now, as I said, guys, Russia actually left the war a little bit early. All right, in 1917, the Communist Party, the Bolsheviks, they rose up against this Russian government, okay? And Russia is now a communist country, all right? It's going to be the Soviet Union. But in 1917, they surrendered to Germany and they signed their own separate peace treaty with Germany. But at the end of the war, when Russia's former allies, Great Britain and France, win, Russia expects its former allies to kind of cut it in on the new, like the reparations and all the spoils that they are now gaining from World War I. Turns out, though, Britain and France and the United States are still a little pissed off at Russia for surrendering early. And so they're not going to assist Russia. They're not going to let Russia get anything, okay? And so going forward, this communist state, this USSR, all right, is not going to trust these Western democracies. They're not going to listen to the United States. They're not going to care about Britain and France. The USSR believes it is alone, all right? It is this communist haven and it is alone. It will not be assisted by these capitalist devil Western democracies, okay? Now, we haven't really said much about Japan, but Japan amazingly sees the tide turning and jumps into World War I mid-war, okay? As I said, Japan sees some of those German islands in the Pacific Rim and realizes that even though Japan and Germany had been friends prior to World War I, they could go ahead and snatch up those colonies if Germany lost. So Japan joins in, I believe, either 1915. They join the war on the side of the Allies. So they fight alongside the French, British, Americans. Now, they don't fight in Europe, but they do take German colonies and they do force Germany to send troops to the Pacific. So Japan expects that the Treaty of Versailles will be favorable to it, okay? But turns out that isn't the case. So the Treaty of Versailles, Japan expects to get a lot of land, all right, from this conflict. They're promised land from the British and French, and turns out they are not given that. And they're not even treated as a major power. In fact, when the major powers came together to discuss this Treaty of Versailles, the Japanese representative was not included. And I'm not gonna lie, guys, it was because of racism. These white leaders from the United States, France, and Germany, and Britain did not even invite this little Asian representative that they thought less of. So Japan is going to leave the Paris Peace Conference devastated. All right, they realize that despite the fact that they are a modernized, powerful nation, an industrialized empire, that these Western Christian democracies are never going to take them seriously. And they're probably right. So what Japan will start to do is they will start to turn towards militarism. They've got very powerful leaders in their navy and their army that, you know what? Look, if the West is not going to take us seriously, we're going to continue to prove how powerful we are. And they're going to give more power to their militaries. Okay. And again, guys, setting us up for the conflict that is World War II. So Germany's got nothing, Russia ain't got nothing, now Japan's not getting anything. Is anyone happy with this Treaty of Versailles? No. Italy is especially not happy. Now you guys might remember that Italy, before World War I, Italy was in an alliance with Germany. But once Austro-Hungary went to war and Germany got sucked into World War I because of its alliance, Italy decided to sit back and say, nah, brah, we don't want any of this. We ain't involved in this, okay? However, a few years later, representatives from Great Britain and France convinced the Italians to join the war on the side of the Allies. So Italy will eventually join World War I. Okay, they'll flip sides, which is something uniquely Italian, going into war on one side and then flipping it on the other. But during the Treaty of Versailles, all the land that Italy was promised, they were not given. They were denied. So Italy was promised land of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and while they were given some land, it was not as much as they expected. So Italy, of course, will also lead the Paris Peace Conference, furious and upset and angry at these Western democracies for promising them something and then not delivering. And Italy will undergo some economic crises when it returns, and Italy will also radicalize, okay? A new fascist leader, and we haven't learned what fascist means yet, but we will, is going to rise within Italy. All right, a man named Benito Mussolini. And just FYI, Benito Mussolini is Adolf Hitler's mentor. All right, so you can imagine this player right here is a baddie. So Italy becomes fascist very early on after World War I. And again, we are leading straight into the World War II conflict, okay? Now, Italy, Japan, Russia, Germany, surely somebody benefited from the Treaty of Versailles? And the answer is no. The United States did not benefit from the Treaty of Versailles either, but that was more of an American choice. Now, this might come as a shock to you, but the United States has always had extremely weird partisan conflicts. During World War I, the American president, a man named Woodrow Wilson, was a Democrat. The Senate was Republican, okay? So Woodrow Wilson goes over to Europe to sign the Treaty of Versailles, right? He also, because the United States probably ended World War I, he also dictates part of the treaty. He's the one that comes up with the League of Nations. It's his idea. It's his brainchild. And the problem is, guys, the Republicans back in the United States think the League of Nations is some 50 shades of crap, and they do not want to join the League of Nations. They don't want to sign the Treaty of Versailles. They look at World War I and they think, why did we get involved in that crap? We are an isolation nation. We have two oceans, the Atlantic and the Pacific Ocean. We shouldn't have to deal with Europe and its craziness. So these American Republican leaders refuse to ratify the treaty. All right, the United States will sign a separate treaty with Germany. The key thing to remember, guys, is that the brainchild, the League of Nations, this precursor to the United Nations, this place where countries can get together and talk out their problems. All right, the pride of Woodrow Wilson, the US decides, not for us. And after the war, the United States will say, peace out, guys. We are no longer going to get involved in European crap. So while Italy becomes fascist and Germany slowly becomes fascist, the United States sits back and is like, not our problem. That is a you problem, not a me problem. All right, the United States will go back to being isolationist. So prior to World War I, the reason the United States does not join the conflict earlier is because it is an isolationist nation. After World War I, the United States, the most powerful empire in the world at this time, okay, the wealthiest. Remember, the United States banks are making bank off of World War I, all right? They're lending money, and that money is being used to buy American goods. The United States is going to say, peace out, all right? We're going back into isolation. Deal with your own problems. Now, on top of all of this, the colonists, all right, those colonies of those imperial empires, Germany, France, Britain, those colonial troops played a very valuable role in World War I. Okay, Indians fought alongside British soldiers. All right, Africans fought alongside French soldiers. All right, the same. Africans also fought for if they were part of a German colony. And after World War I, these colonists felt like, look, we played our role. We came to your assistance. Now it's time for us to be free of you. All right. Believing that they had a role to play in this victory, these non-white colonists were devastated when Britain and France did not give these colonies freedom. They believed that they had earned the right to a nation state away from the British Empire, the French Empire, the German Empire. And so through the process of nationalism, you start to see groups of people in Africa, all right, in Asia, starting to kind of feel like it's our time to be our own nation state, to get these imperialist empires out. And unfortunately, guys, the Treaty of Versailles doesn't allow that to happen. As soon as the war is over, France goes back to its colonies, Britain goes back to its colonies. Now, the world looks very, very different after World War I, okay? And this is what you guys need to make sure you understand here. Pre-World War I, Germany is this mass empire flanked on both sides by France and Russia. Germany loses 1/3 of its territory, okay? The Soviet Union, right, in that peace treaty it signed with Germany, had to give up Poland and all of these little areas as well. Okay, all of these new Balkan states, all right, are going to be new countries. Sadly, Serbia still doesn't really have its own country at the end of World War I, but that's a whole other separate issue. All right, Italy does gain some new land from the Austro-Hungarian Empire, but not as much as it was promised. All right, France gets back the Alsace-Lorraine that it lost from the Germans in 1871, guys, okay? As you can see, the world looks a little bit different in the aftermath of World War I, okay? Nationalism has provided the opportunity for some nation states to gain their own nations. Russia is gone, replaced by the communist Soviet Union. The Ottoman Empire is gone, replaced by Turkey. All right. Prior to World War I, guys, this is how the world looks. You can see, you remember what Africa looked like in the aftermath of the Berlin Conference. All right, the Russian Empire, the United States. After World War I, the world looks different, okay? Europe, there are more nation states now. The Soviet Union is much smaller. The Japanese Empire, of course, has grown, but the world is beginning to look a little bit more what it looks like now in 2021. Now, there are some other important things you need to understand about the Treaty of Versailles, and one of them is the creation of this system of mandates. So prior to World War I, we said that Germany had colonies in Africa, and usually these colonies were near British colonies. Well, after World War I, part of the Treaty of Versailles was to strip Germany of its overseas empires. So the Japanese got some of its island colonies over in the Pacific Rim, and the British and the French were going to acquire these colonies in Africa. But they weren't going to just absorb them into the British and French Empire. They were sort of given this thing called the mandates. So these are special colonies that they're meant to administer. And it's not just in Africa, guys. The Ottoman Empire, which we said was kind of part of North Africa as well as the Middle East. Once the Ottoman Empire broke up after World War I, Britain is going to control that area in the Middle East, and they're going to create smaller states to administer. All right. And there were many people in the Middle East that fought with the British against the Ottomans. One of the most important is the Palestinian people. So in the aftermath of the Treaty of Versailles, the Palestinians expected the British to grant them their own nation state. That does not happen. Okay. The British will keep that area under a mandate, but they will not give the Palestinians a nation state. Many of these areas of Africa and the Middle East will not receive the nation state, despite fighting alongside the British as colonists of the empire. And that is going to cause some serious resentment. But it is not just Africa, and it is not just the Middle East, but it is also in Asia. We saw those pictures of Indian troops who fought alongside British soldiers. All right, remember, India is part of the sun never sets on the British Empire. Gandhi, this guy, which we all know, all right, this very important peaceful leader, a leader of the nonviolent movement, he will fight alongside the British troops. He will serve in France during World War I. And afterwards, he will go back to India, and he will expect the British Empire to give independence to India. Look, we fought alongside you. We saved your butt in World War I. Now give us freedom. British ain't gonna do that. So Gandhi is going to form something called the Indian National Congress. Right? The Indian National Congress will be a group that wants an independent Indian nation state. Okay? No more of this, we're a colony of the British Empire BS. Okay? But in many ways, after World War I, the British actually tightened their grip on India. Okay, they really don't want to lose. The Great Britain is very in an economic situation where they really can't afford to give up India. They have spent so much money on munitions and World War I that they cannot afford to give India independence. So the British will tighten their grip on India. And it's going to lead to increased tensions. Okay, the British and the Indian nationalists will be in conflict. Okay. So guys, that is the end of my lesson. All right. As you can see, the Treaty of Versailles was disastrous. It was truly a disaster. No one was really happy. I mean, France and Britain kind of happy. They got some new colonies. All right. They got some of their old land back. But for the most part, it was a disaster. It set the stage for World War II. And to be honest with you, many historians, even today, will say that World War II is not a separate conflict. World War II was just a continuation of World War I. And you can see that. The Treaty of Versailles does not make anyone happy. And instead, it sets the stage for the conflicts of World War II. So guys, thank you for listening on. Okay, we are getting closer and closer to our AP test in May, and I know you are all going to do great. Okay, send me an email if you miss class for your in-class assignments, but if not, have a great rest of your day, and I will see you guys soon.